What's up, ladies and gentlemen? This is Sugi JRPG here, and today I'm absolutely delighted to review Resonance of Fate, also known as Edge of Eternity, 4K/HD edition for Windows Steam. And this version came out back in 2018, while the original version was released for PS3 and Xbox 360 back in 2010. Now, the 4K version comes along with optional 4K graphics pack. This is pretty hefty on its size, but if you do actually have the extra space in your computer, I don't see any reason why not installing it, as it is making your game look a lot better. Yes, without the graphics pack, you still have that HD definition, which is better than on the original game, but in case, as I said, if you have that extra space, why not install the graphics pack? Now, the game is costing currently around 35 euros still on Steam, and that is a pretty hefty price for a game that is this old. And yes, I understand that this is a HD remaster, but it doesn't really have any other quality of life changes inside the game in terms of some graphic overhaul settings on the menu. In terms of the gameplay, it is actually the very same game. But then again, in terms of the bang for the buck, it is a pretty good price, as the main completion for the game can be anywhere from 40 to 50 hours, given how many side missions you are willing to do. Also, for a completionist run, it can take anywhere from 110 hours to complete this game, and obviously there's also New Game Plus feature. Now let's talk about a bit of the premise. What exactly is Resonance of Fate about? So it takes place in this steampunk world, which is taking place in a futuristic Earth, which has been plagued by this atmospheric pollution, making the surface basically dead for all life. And this led humanity to basically construct this purification system known as Basel, and they created out this massive central tower where basically humanity is living under these different levels, under this watch of the mechanical core known as Zenith. And that's basically that kind of like the premise of the world of Resonance of Fate. So let's start off by talking about the gameplay of Resonance of Fate, and I have to say here from the get-go that this is probably going to be the hardest JRPG game that you will ever play in your life. It is also probably the most unique combat system that you will ever experience inside a JRPG game. Now that those two announcements are out of the way, let's talk about the combat system. So you have three protagonists inside this game: Zephyr, Leanne, and Vashyron, and the core gameplay of the combat revolves around guns. There's two types: machine guns, which do scratch damage, which is blue, and then you have pistols, which do direct damage, which is red. Most enemies have to be shot with scratch damage first, and then with direct damage. The scratch damage is kind of like a form of armor penetration. It weakens out the enemy, and then you basically execute them with direct damage. So that is with the pistols. You also have throwables in this game, which are basically grenades, which also do direct damage, and there's different types of elemental damage that they can do, like ice, fire, electricity, all that type of stuff. And they also do different types of status ailments like poison or burn, for example, or freeze. So they're kind of like the magic items inside the game. But the big catch here is that you're not freely able to choose what you're going to be equipping for each character. Each character has two different slots. So for example, you can choose two pistols, which allows you to dual wield, or one pistol and one machine gun, or machine gun with an extra barrel which comes with special bullets which do different types of different damage, or you're going to be doing like a machine gun with grenades. So you can't have all of them on a one single character. So you have to constantly change your setup inside the game to do the perfect blend of damage and understand which character takes damage from this type of elemental grenade and all that type of stuff. So there's a lot of like strategy that goes inside into this combat. And then we have the whole moving system. So basically you have these hero actions, which allows you to basically run in a straight line or jump, and this allows you to kind of like a Matrix style shoot a lot of bullets and do a lot of damage on the enemies. The hero actions are going to be costing you basils, which are kind of like the system of, if the basils go into zero, you basically go into this critical mode where your characters become extra weak, and 90% chance you're going to be losing that battle, which is kind of crazy. And this is very similar into Final Fantasy 13, that if one of your characters die, it is game over. So none of the people can actually die in the fight. So it's a very, very difficult combat system, which is punishing you quite a lot, especially if you're going to be losing all of those basils and go into that critical mode. There's also this try-attack thing, which is another way to basically synergize attack. It's kind of more like an ultimate ability in certain ways inside the game, and you can change a bit of the setups and equipment between the characters, and the combat is basically staying out mostly the same throughout the game. It gets a bit more complex as it progresses forward. You get a lot more options, perhaps a lot more items, but this is the core gameplay, and that doesn't really change that much. Now, one of the things, if you're starting out the game, I recommend going into the arena. There's a great tutorial. There's like 15 different tutorial tasks that you can do, which will basically teach you how to play this game, because this is a game where you need that tutorial. Otherwise, you're totally clueless how to play this game, and you're just gonna be getting wrecked left and right. This is a hard game, and tutorials are very essential so you get hang of it. So the combat is actually pretty unique and fun, but it does have a lot of limitations and a lot of learning curve when it comes to especially special types of enemies. Now, outside of the combat, we obviously have the progression systems, and you level up in the game, and you level up by actually leveling up your pistols. You have pistol level, machine gun level, and then you have throwables level. And by using these 3 different things, attacking basically, you're leveling up inside the game. If the 2 of your first party members are killing already the enemies, there might be a chance that your third character becomes very under-leveled. This is one of the issues of the game, so you gotta be wary about that. But you can obviously shift around these weapons with each different characters, and they will level up faster. But the way the leveling system basically works is that you basically only get more health and more carry weight. So you're not getting any damage by actually leveling up inside this game. And this gets into our second form of progression inside the game, where we are using these equipments on guns. And this is kind of like a neat model. It reminds us of, like, if you have played Resident Evil 4, 3, 2, 1, it's the same thing. You are basically adding attachments inside the weapon, and this will take more space in basically on the inventory, and it also, by adding more things, will increase the carry weight. So if your carry weight is over exceeded, the person cannot use that weapon. So that is one thing that you really need to understand about the system. And even when you actually equip these attachments into these weapons, and this is your pretty much number one way of scaling inside the game. Obviously, the grenades are a totally different thing, and you can't do any attachments on them, and they do very good damage, but they're kind of hard to come by. So this attachment thing is something, it's basically your main form of progression, and it's not very easy, as you can't straight up buy up new things. You have to craft them on these people known as tinkers inside different cities inside the game. So it's not like very straightforward progression. Like, you have to grind a lot, you have to get ingredients, and you have to complete missions to basically get special attachments into these items. And most likely you're not going to be changing any weapons throughout the game. You might have that opportunity at some point, but mostly you can start off and, end with the same weapons that you have in the beginning of the game, as all of them are kind of having the same attachment systems. There's not like, machine gun has its own attachments, and so does the pistols, and they overlap a bit, but fundamentally, like, most of the progression will be on these weapons. And then there's, obviously, we talked about the grenades. The problem in the game kind of is that it's really hard to just kind of get a lot of these grenade items inside the game. You can't straight up buy them from the vendor. You have to craft most of them, and you need a lot of ingredients, so you have to grind a lot inside the game. So progressing and getting stronger in the game is really hard. So it really comes down to a lot of the actual strategy that you do in the game. I mean, there are literally speed runs of people running the game in 2 hours, so that is kind of impressive. So once you kind of understand the very core gameplay mechanics, you're going to be doing pretty well. Now, in terms of the world map, it's pretty interesting. It's kind of like this hexagonal map where you progress, and by defeating enemies and by doing quests, you're basically getting these hexes, which can basically unlock these slots and allows you to move around these multiple layers inside the world. And this is very interesting visually, and it's a new way to explore the world map. I actually very much like it. And it obviously is progression locked, so basically you have to progress in chapters until you get to like explore a lot of the lower levels. And also by unlocking these things, these hexes, you might have item drops coming out from them. These are grenades, gun parts, and all types of craftable things and things that you can basically dismantle for more parts. It's a nice system, and it basically fuels into your inventory, and there are obviously guides which basically show you in which positions are there locked items and things like that. But it's actually kind of satisfying, and it's not like super hard. You don't need to really think about some Tetris 500 IQ stuff. Like, it's pretty straightforward. And lastly, also, you can customize the look of your characters. This was very of that era, like when we had Final Fantasy 13 was also, I believe, the first Final Fantasy game where you could change costumes, and we a lot of saw that here as well. There's many costumes that you can unlock inside the game for wardrobe for all the 3 characters. You can unlock these costume pieces from quests, from unlocking the hexes on world map, and then there's also a dedicated shop in the main city where you can buy these things. I wouldn't go wasting too much money on them though, because money is not very easy to come by in the game, sadly. So you want to save that for weapon parts. But if you're like a total maybe have insane amounts of money, you can obviously spend some money on these visual wardrobes. And I have to say the costumes are pretty nice, and I like this form of customization, as you can basically always customize at any point in the game. You're not locked in to using this costume for the whole totality of the game. Now, when it comes to the audio and music, there isn't really that many great things that I can say about the OST. It's mostly generic symphonic tracks. There's a bit of rock thrown into the mix when it comes to the battle themes, and a lot of it is very forgettable. I would not listen to this outside of this game. But if there was a one track that would stand out from the rest, that would probably be track number 1, which plays in the actual game menu when you start out the game. It gives me a bit of Kingdom Hearts vibes, especially in the latter part of the song, and this probably would be the most well-crafted song in the whole OST, which is actually quite large for a game this size. I mean, this is a AA game essentially, but the OST has maybe like over 60 songs like that, and that's pretty much for a game this size. Now also there is the option to basically play with the Japanese and the English dub of this game, and I always kind of say 99% of the time to basically play with the Japanese dub, because the dialogue feels a lot more sensical in the Japanese version, and it's a lot more authentic experience. Especially back in these days, only game that would have a good English dub would always be the Final Fantasy games, and everything else would just kind of like get like very annoying sounding English voice actors, and they would translate things very differently, and it would just make the tune and everything feel very, very differently. But I would have to say that the English dub is not horrible, it's okay, but the Japanese dub is definitely better out of the two. Now let's talk about the story, and yes, there will be some minor spoilers included here, so in case you don't want to know anything, skip to the last segment of this video. So when it comes to the initial premise, that people are living in this crazy steampunk tower with clocks and multiple levels, that was a really cool idea in my opinion. There was a lot of potential to explore the class struggle in Basel, or the mythology behind the creation of Basel and how it came to be, and what was the reason the atmosphere became toxic. Was there a conspiracy behind it or something? Well, we don't know because it's never explained. So the game does really bad exposition. You have to literally read the lore from Wikipedia, or maybe there's some random NPC somewhere which will give you 2 lines of actual good lore and explanation what is going on, because the game does very little explaining about the world itself and how Basel or Zenith came to be. Yes, they will reference it in a couple of lines and things, but it's very abstract in a lot of ways. And yes, we are getting exposure into these cardinals who are top of the hierarchy and the religious heads of Basel, but this exposition was extremely shallow, and we barely are explained anything about the faith. There seems to be some type of a Bible book, but we maybe get 2 passings from that book, like there's no readable version in the world about it, or just like it's just very surface level stuff, and nothing is really explored there. And the Japanese games devs have been stuck too long at this South Park atheism wave and keep repeating these God bad narratives, which have consisted for decades right now. I mean, even in the last Final Fantasy 16, the overall plotline was God bad, and it's getting really tiresome. Either just don't do gods at all, or maybe do a pantheon, or maybe just, you know, portray the gods in a good sense for a change. So this kind of like nihilistic view of God is just like getting really redundant for me, at least, because it's used so much as a plotline in JRPGs. And so when it comes to the actual story, it's broken down into 16 chapters, and the first 6 are really revolving around the protagonist trio doing odd jobs for cardinals and other people in Basel. So this is kind of more like a monster of the week type of task. They don't really have that much impact on the overall story. They're kind of there for character development and, you know, exploring a lot of these side characters and kind of like introducing them into the world. And then there are these segments from 2 other cardinals who have some key moments, and they are kind of like very pivotal in the overall story, and you get a bit of exposure and build up for them, because it's important to also build up your villains, not just something that randomly appears in the last hour of the game. And then when you get around chapter 7, the story starts to progress a lot faster, and we get to explore a lot of the backstories of the trio protagonists. And when it comes to the protagonists, I think the characters are overall decent. Like Leanne is the female doll archetype, whose most significant character in terms of the overall plot of the game, like very pivotal character here. Then we have Zephyr, which is the edgy kid who represents this sort of a emo archetype of the, you know, mid-2000s, like very, and he's also like the love interest of Leanne, so there's a bit of like a love thing going on between the two, but he is definitely the emo archetype. And then lastly we have Vashyron, who is this former soldier turned into a hunter. A hunter is kind of like a mercenary, or, you know, people who are doing odd jobs. That's what they are doing, the protagonists in this thing. He's like the uncle archetype. He's also a bit inconsistent as a character in a sense, as he's trying to be this sort of a serious uncle at times to Leanne and Zephyr, like maybe a big brother type. And then sometimes he's like playing this weird pervert, and sometimes he's very comedic, and sometimes he's like super serious. So his persona is not very consistent in my opinion. It's not like a realistic character design, whereas at one point he's like super serious and at one point it's very comedic. Like, yes, some people can do that, but is it believable with all these other traits? It's just not something that I actually find very believable. Now, I'm not going to spoil the actual ending of the game, but I have to say it is a bit of an interesting one. It's something, it's not like super unique, but like maybe the conclusion is something that you would not expect to have, because it's not like super abstract black and white type of a story that these are the bad guys, these are the good guys. It's more like people have different types of views about how the business will be run, and, you know, like a life in general. It kind of like, there's this sort of existential crisis within Zephyr, for example, like why I have to live, why did I die, like he has this emo fucking thing going on, and some other people are talking about life in general. That's one of the big themes about it, and that's why one of the names was End of Eternity, and that kind of makes a lot of sense once you play the game. What exactly is this overarching story about people and their life and lifespans? But the there is a bit of an ending there, which kind of like plays into that there could be a potential sequel coming out. Like, it could be, there's like stepping stones for a potential sequel, but maybe that will happen in the next 100 years or something. I wouldn't bet my money on that. So let's get into my final verdict. There are things that this game does well, things that are interesting and innovating, but frankly, there are just too many bad game design choices. Like I said previously, the game is hard, it's very unforgiving, there's no difficulty options, no easy mode. Even if you try to compensate by overgrinding, you're not gonna get a really good edge, simply because the game revolves around your understanding of the strategy, and a lot of the progression is locked behind the item system. Also, you're kind of forced to do all the side missions to keep up with the current difficulty on the game, as those side missions give you very pivotal items and Basel points. In terms of the combat, it kind of gets redundant after a while, as you're not really unlocking any new mechanics or new weapon types. It's like pretty much the same stages and new enemies with a different tint from start to finish. The combat really doesn't change. Yes, you're going to be shooting faster on the late game, but that's about it. In terms of the premise of the game and its story, I felt there was a lot of potential there, but its execution wasn't the greatest. There was a lot of major pacing issues. It was very slow in the beginning. I also thought that the exposition wasn't clear enough for the game and its world. But I would still be very interested actually having a sequel game to Resonance of Fate. I could see it work if they would bring and incorporate the best elements from this game, like the guns, maybe throw on new gun models and bit more complexity into the combat on an optional sense and make it more forgiving, like characters could actually die and you could rest them back and all that stuff. And we could even keep up the hex system if we wanted to from this game. But I mean, it's maybe 1 in 1,000 chance we're ever going to be seeing a sequel, but I'm saying that the potential would be technically there. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for more reviews on the channel by subscribing, and I will be seeing you when the next review drops out.